The lot felt smaller now that the house was gone. Mara stood along the edge of the property line with both hands tucked into her jacket pockets, watching the way the ash had settled. It wasn't dramatic, nothing like the scenes in movies. It simply lay there, flat and heavy, like layers of sediment, as if it had always belonged there and had finally stopped pretending otherwise. 3 days had passed since the fire. 2 since investigators released the property. 1 since her father had flown in from Phoenix. He had embraced her at the airport, and what she remembered most was how quickly it ended. It was the kind of hug given by a man checking off an obligation. They drove to the property together, her father sitting quietly in the passenger seat for nearly the entire 40-minute drive. He glanced at his phone. He watched the scenery slide by. He looked everywhere except at her. The silence didn't bother her. She had spent her childhood inside it. Only after she parked at the curb, the charred foundation appearing before them, and switched off the engine did he finally speak. "The adjuster called me." She kept her eyes on the property. "He called you? I'm still listed as your emergency contact. From years ago. CIS's payout is going to be substantial." She already knew the amount. $250. Her house, every piece of furniture, years of paperwork, her grandmother's jewelry, every feeling of permanence she had built, all compressed into a single number on an insurance claim. "Daniel needs that money more than you." She turned toward her father, not with anger, but with the expression of someone studying a map and realizing she'd misunderstood it for years. He continued speaking. His explanation was thorough, almost as though he'd practiced it beforehand. Daniel's business debts, Daniel's 3 children, Daniel's mortgage problems. He had every figure memorized, prepared as if he were presenting a financial proposal. "You're stable," he said at last. "You're single. You'll be fine." She nodded once. She didn't tell him she'd been paying every one of her own bills since she was 22. She didn't explain that she'd spent 9 years saving for the down payment on that house. She didn't remind him that stability wasn't something anyone had handed her. It came from falling without anyone there to catch her, over and over, until learning to land alone became something that looked easy. She said none of those things. Instead, she looked back at the burned property. "I have a meeting with the fire marshal tomorrow. I'll go with you." "You don't have to." The investigator's name was Reyes. He carried himself like someone who had spent 2 decades separating evidence from emotion and had learned how to do it with kindness. He began with the standard questions. Where the fire started, accelerant testing, the property's electrical history. Then he set his pen down. "Miss Callahan, we ask everyone this. Who had physical access to the property during the 7 days before the fire?" She had been in the hospital the week before, a minor laparoscopic procedure. 2 nights under observation without being asked. She removed her discharge paperwork from her bag and placed it on his desk. He reviewed it and made a note. Did anyone else have a key? She thought carefully. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Farrow, 73 years old, had one so she could water the plants whenever Mara traveled. Years earlier, her brother had also had a copy, but she had replaced every lock in 2021 after an argument she had never truly explained to anyone. What she finally said was, "My brother had a copy once. I can't honestly say whether he ever gave it back." Reyes wrote another note. His expression never changed. That was the nature of institutional authority. It didn't dramatize anything. It simply continued with the next fact. She wasn't required to attend the follow-up meeting, so she didn't. Everything she eventually learned reached her in fragments through phone calls she hadn't made. The woman across the street had installed a security camera on the corner of her porch because she was extremely protective of her delivered packages. The storage facility at the end of the block also had exterior cameras pointed toward the street. Together, the footage provided investigators with an exact timeline, a truck they recognized, and a man they were able to identify. The insurance company assigned its own investigative team. Working independently, they reviewed separate footage and ultimately reached the same conclusion. She never found out what Daniel said during his interview. She never asked. Her father called on a Thursday evening. She watched the phone ring once before answering. He didn't speak immediately. She could hear him breathing. The slow rhythm of a man who had spent his entire life believing every situation could be managed, now carrying something he didn't know how to carry. "Mara," he finally said. "I know," she answered. Silence settled between them again. "I didn't know," he whispered. She believed him. That was the hardest part. She truly believed he hadn't known. Daniel had acted completely on his own. Her father had simply reached his conclusion before there was any evidence proving otherwise. He had looked at both of his children, arranged them according to convenience, exactly as he always had. And he'd done it for so many years that he no longer even noticed he was doing it. "I want to." "Dad," she interrupted softly, "not right now." Then she ended the call. 6 weeks later, the insurance settlement arrived. The payment was issued entirely in her name. Everything else was handled by the insurance company in ways that no longer involved her. She rented an apartment in a neighborhood she had always admired, but had assumed was beyond her budget. It had 2 bedrooms. Morning sunlight filled the rooms beautifully. The kitchen offered enough counter space that cooking actually felt enjoyable. The first thing she bought was a proper bed, a real frame, the kind she had always promised herself she'd own one day when life finally became steady. Now, it had standing inside that empty apartment. She didn't feel victorious. What she felt was quieter, stronger, more lasting. It was the feeling of finally being seen, not by the people who should have recognized her worth, but by evidence, by timestamps, by the impartial, mechanical eye of cameras that recorded everything without preference or bias. For 20 years she had questioned whether her understanding of her own family had been accurate or somehow distorted. Now she had her answer. She unpacked the boxes, she cooked herself dinner, she didn't call her brother, she didn't call her father. She sat beside the window where the morning light would fall, and for the first time in many years she experienced the unmistakable peace of a woman who no longer had to keep wondering,